Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Sam.
There's a new Netflix show that everyone is talking about. It's called Monsters, and it's based on the true story of the Menendez brothers, who were found guilty of murder in 1996. Over 2 decades later, US authorities have now announced they'll review new evidence in the case. In today's deep dive, we're going to explore the case that's got everyone talking and what could happen now that the LA District Attorney is considering new evidence. So Sam, have you watched Monsters on Netflix?
Well, I'm about 80% of the way through, and the reason
you're
I'm
ahead of me.
Right, but I think the reason that both of us are watching it is because it's just been talked about so much.
Everyone is talking about it.
And that's why I was excited when you said we're going to do this for today's episode, because I do think that it's going to help people who perhaps haven't watched it catch up on what's been happening. And I thought that was important to say because you don't have to tune out right now if you haven't watched it.
No.
We're going to explain what's going on.
And even, I'm only 1 episode deep. I just keep not finding the time to watch it. But I must admit, I knew very little about this case before this show. Like, very little. I don't know that I'd ever had a conversation about it in my life.
Well, I don't think you're alone in that. And
I was not born
when
they were convicted.
That's an important factor.
Yeah.
But you can tell I've seen some interesting articles about how many times the Menendez brothers were Googled and that kind of stuff. I mean, the attention on this case has been greatly heightened because of the fact that they're on the streaming service. So,
okay, well, we're getting a bit carried away before we've even explained. So why don't I just start with a bit of an explainer as to what we're actually talking about. So that
pretend I haven't watched it.
Okay, so I'll give you a bit of background into the Menendez brothers and this case. So Lyle and Eric Menendez grew up surrounded by wealth and by privilege. And I know that that's a strange point to start with, but it's important to keep in mind as we keep talking about this case. They lived with their father, Jose Menendez, who was a successful entertainment executive, and with their mother, Mary Louise Anderson, who was known at the time as Kitty. When the boys were teenagers, the family relocated to Beverly Hills in California, where Eric was a nationally ranked tennis player and Lyle was very academic. He attended Princeton, which is, of course, a prestigious university on the US East Coast. Now, close to midnight on the 20th of August 1989, police received a call from 21-year-old Lyle, who said that he and his then 18-year-old brother Eric had returned home to find their parents dead in the living room.
What's the problem? Someone killed my parents. Pardon me? Someone killed my parents. What? Who? Are they still there? Yes. The people... No.
The brothers told police that they had spent the evening at a movie theatre and at a food festival in Santa Monica. Initially, police were suspecting that the mafia might have been behind the murders of the Menendez brothers' parents. Which
was, of course, a suggestion by the brothers to police that they should look into the mafia. When did the police start looking into the sons?
So as I said, they initially weren't actually viewed as suspects by police, but then authorities began to get a bit suspicious when the pair went on a spending spree in the months following their parents' murders. They spent $700,000 on real estate, on Rolex watches, on sports cars, tennis coaches, and even a restaurant on the Princeton campus. And remember when I said at the beginning that they had been surrounded by this wealth, that goes into this part of the story. It all came to a head in March of 1990 when the brothers were eventually arrested after a woman who had a sexual relationship with their psychologist informed authorities that they had confessed to killing their parents during a recorded therapy session. There is a lot there.
There is a lot there. It is, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but you can understand why someone would make a TV show about it. It is so dramatic.
Completely. And this chapter of the story ends with the brothers confessing to entering their home with guns and firing multiple shots at close range, killing their parents.
So they get arrested and they confess to the double murder of their parents. They then go to trial. Tell me a little bit about the trial.
Yeah, so it's actually trials, plural.
Right.
So in the first instance, both of these brothers were tried in separate trials. So that began in 1993, and both of the brothers testified that they had killed their parents in an act of self-defense, which is a full defense that can lead to an acquittal if, that holds up in a court. They cited years of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse from their father. They also claimed that their mother was aware of the abuse, but that she chose to ignore it. And it was Eric in particular who alleged that he'd been sexually abused by his father since he was 6 years old.
Can I just make one point there? You said the self-defense of emotional abuse. To put that into perspective, on the other end of the scale, they were facing the death penalty. So we're talking about a long range of potential consequences here.
Or outcomes, yeah. And so if that was the defense that these brothers had, on the flip side, we had the prosecution who picked up on this spending spree that I was talking about earlier and argued that the brothers killed their parents out of greed, that they wanted to inherit the millions and millions that their parents had, which today is around $36 million US. And so they were suggesting that this was something about money, that they killed their parents wanting the money that would come next. In terms of the outcome of that case, each brother was assigned a separate jury, but neither of those juries reached a consensus. And so when a jury can't reach a consensus, then there is a retrial that is ordered.
You start the whole thing again with a new pool of jurors.
Which blows my mind. I remember learning about that at school. And so then we headed into retrial territory, and that was in 1996. And in that case, we had the brothers tried in a single trial with a single jury. And the judge at the time said that the advantages of a single trial greatly outweigh the potential prejudice.
But you have to remember, this is 6 years after their initial arrest. So there's also a bit of pressure at this point on the justice system to reach a verdict here.
Yeah. And so in that retrial, the really important thing here is that the judge refused to admit much of the evidence about the alleged abuse. And so it had quite a different nature to it, this retrial. And in the retrial, the end result was that each brother was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
There's so much in this case, and what is striking about it is that there is no discussion here about whether they killed their parents or not. There is unequivocal evidence that they did plan to kill and killed their parents. The question here is about all the other factors. Fast forward to today and the brothers are in prison. They're serving life sentences. We're talking about it on the podcast because now there's been a Netflix series made about them, but it's taken a whole real life turn.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the actual case in 2024.
Yeah, so we're speaking about it on today's pod because last week, the LA County District Attorney's Office announced it would review possible new evidence in the case. And according to the DA's office, the review will centre around a letter that was written by Eric, which his lawyers say corroborates allegations of sexual abuse by his father. And remember, I mentioned that during that retrial in the 90s, the brothers' self-defense argument was largely dismissed. So this could be a real game changer. Prosecutors at that time argued there was no credible evidence that Jose Menendez had sexually abused his children. But now there's this letter. And so earlier this month, we had the district attorney say that the alleged abuse would have been treated with greater sensitivity by prosecutors and the court had the case been presented today, which I think is probably a fair assumption given how far we've kind of moved in these sorts of public discussions. But the big thing here is that reopening the case and, presenting this new evidence could see the brothers, who are now 53 and 56 respectively, released, on one end, or at least handed a reduced sentence if that is admitted. The DA has said his office is evaluating all of the evidence ahead of a hearing next month, and that is scheduled for November 29, so just over a month away. He said, "We've not decided on an outcome. We are reviewing information." So just not a done deal.
Right. So just to recap, this is not the DA saying there's going to be a retrial on November 29. This is a hearing to decide whether there's enough new evidence, or at least whether there's enough updated understanding of the evidence that was presented at the time and thrown out to entertain a retrial. Realistically, that would probably happen then next year.
Yeah.
This is all happening in live time, as at least you and I, but I think a lot of us are either mid-watching or have just finished this Netflix show. Did the DA in his press conference refer to this phenomenon?
He did. He said that his office had received an influx of calls following the release of the show, but I think we've got to be careful here. He didn't make any claim that there was a direct correlation or that, something had been shown in that show that they didn't know before.
Sure.
But of course, when there is so much attention on something, there might be a greater urge to perhaps revisit things. But I do want to just zero in on the show for a second because it's been massive, as we've said. It was viewed 19.5 million times last week and everyone's talking about it. But I want to talk about the way that the Menendez brothers have responded to this show because it's about them. It's about their lives and the actions that they have taken in their lives. And safe to say, they are not fans of this show. So it's been really, really heavily criticised by them. I'm going to read part of a statement from Eric about the show. He said, "It's sad for me to know that Netflix's dishonest portrayal of tragedies surrounding our crime have taken the painful truths several steps back through time to an era when the prosecution built a narrative on a belief system that males were not sexually abused and that males experienced rape trauma differently than women." He said that the show was rampant with blatant lies. And so really clear criticism there from one of the central characters of this show. On the other side of it, though, and of course we need to hear the defense to some claims like that, we have the creator or a co-creator of the show, Ryan Murphy, who's created every show under the sun. He's behind Glee.
The Jeffrey Dahmer miniseries, which a lot of us watched earlier this year.
Yeah, so he has defended, of course, his show, and he's accused the brothers of faux outrage. He went on to say, "I know for a fact that many people have offered to help them because of the interest in the show." And he said, "We have an obligation to so many people, not just to Eric and Lyle. I also think that two things can be true. They could have killed their parents and also had been abused."
There's a couple of interesting points that have happened only in the last couple of days. I've seen a trailer for a documentary where the two men are going to portray their side of the story. The other big turning point in the last week, I think, has been this opinion piece by Kim Kardashian. And she wrote a piece for NBC News saying, "I have visited the Menendez brothers many times. In prison, they are good, honest men, and I want to help with their defense." And
this is always a quirk of Kim Kardashian.
Yeah.
She has been a very loud advocate for many people who are behind bars who she believes were, victims of wrongdoing or an unjust court system. And so her intervention here, cannot be underestimated.
It's a really fascinating story, and we're going to see what happens next month with this hearing where the court will consider this new evidence. Before we finish up, I do just want to remind everybody that there is always help available. The number for Kids Helpline is 1-800-55-1800. And as always, 1-800-RESPECT can be reached by anyone on 1-800-737-732. Zara, thanks for explaining, and we'll chat again on Monday.